that's been dragging you down, and get up in the air. Just pretend that you can fly. You'll never know if you can till you try.
Hi, and welcome to Cannabis Helps Dementia. I'm Chella.
I'm Dave, and right up front we'd like to say that we're not doctors or medical professionals, and nothing you hear in this podcast should be considered medical advice.
Right.
We're not experts, but throughout this podcast series, you'll hear from doctors, nurses, research scientists, administrators, other caregivers, and people living with dementia about how cannabis helps.
Like it did for our family.
That's right.
After my mom was diagnosed with dementia, we were thrust into family caregiving and became fierce advocates for people living with dementia. In this episode, we're connecting with Jude Thilman. We first learned of Jude at a conference on cannabis medicine. She wrote a great article about her mother who had lived with Alzheimer's dementia.
In the article, she referenced several studies, including the 2016 Salk Institute study that showed microdoses of THC reduces beta amyloid proteins in human neurons, and a University of Bonn study of dementia in mice successfully treated with THC.
Jude is a longtime medical cannabis educator, policy leader, and entrepreneur in Mendocino, California. In 2011, she founded Dragonfly Wellness Dispensary and Holistic Healing Center in Fort Bragg and has been at the forefront of the modern medical cannabis movement. Jude is dedicated to changing the outdated narrative and resultant policy on medical cannabis and is heavily involved in California's efforts to create a viable regulatory scheme for cannabis that includes medicinal cannabis. So far, it's neglected by regulations.
Jude is a producer of the video series Cannabis is Medicine, Changing the Narrative, host of Cannabis News and Views, a biweekly program on Mendocino TV, and a patient counselor who promotes cannabis as a viable, effective treatment option. Jude comes from a lifelong commitment to social change and has been an activist on behalf of many causes. She strongly believes that healthcare is a human right, and she sees a return to traditional herbal medicine as one means of achieving that right for all. Jude is also a cannabis patient herself.
Jude Thilman, thanks so much for joining us on Cannabis Helps Dementia today.
Thank you.
Yeah. In your article, Alzheimer's, Dementia, and Cannabis, What If We Started Sooner?, you referenced several studies and asked the question, what if we started cannabis therapeutics earlier in treatment? Why do you think that cannabis might be helpful in easing the symptoms and possibly the progression of dementia?
Well, we're talking about seniors, dementia, cannabis. Alzheimer's is the disease. Dementia is a presentation of different indicators. So it's analogous to the cold is the disease, the runny nose is the symptom, one of the many symptoms. Dementia is a constellation of various indicators of Alzheimer's potentially. But to start with seniors, why seniors, and why is this a particular use to seniors using cannabis to treat dementia, Alzheimer's? First of all, and I am a senior myself, those of us who grew up in the 60s are not scared to death of the word cannabis, like many people in society, because of the messages we've gotten over the years from mainstream media about it being this horribly scary get high drug that's going to turn our children into crack cocaine addicts. And people are in my age bracket are pretty much, that's not going to fly. They're aware of it. They grew up in the 60s, early 70s, and not scared to death of cannabis. Second of all, I find over 60% of my patients on the Mendocino coast are retirees who are very educated. They do their research. When they hear this string of side effects on TV from pharmaceutical ads, they go and they read about natural herbal solutions to disease and to ill health, and they learn. They're educated. They're self-educated. They do their homework. So you give them something to read, a handout, for example, and they read it. It's amazing. Also, the most important thing is that when you get into the age bracket over 65, we're facing certain common problems: sleeplessness, arthritis, diabetes, Parkinson's. There are a number of diseases and illnesses that we're facing, and we're disappointed and disillusioned with the pharmaceutical model. It's either not really helping with those conditions, or it's creating a lot of side effects that we're very, very sad to have to face. So turning to cannabis has been a real natural swing for seniors. What are we principally treating with seniors? And I'm saying anyone over 60. Before COVID, we had with seniors, sleep issues, we had anxiety, we had stress, but with COVID, that's now spread to the general population. It's becoming something everybody's facing, but it intersects with the conditions of health that seniors are experiencing. So less blood to the brain is one physiological thing, less activity, so there's less exercise among seniors. There's more of a tendency towards the accumulation of conditions in the physiology that affect heart. There's more heart disease. There's more inclination toward cancer. There's a lot of things going on as you get older with just the rundown of your system. So all of those stressors with COVID, the anxiety, the depression, the sort of concern about uncertainty about tomorrow that often result in sleeplessness, it's a double whammy for seniors. So they're a smart, self-educated population, but they're getting hit hard and harder than ever by COVID. So let's talk about dementia then. So cannabis doesn't understand these words. Cannabis, the plant, doesn't know the difference between lung cancer and breast cancer. It doesn't even know the word cancer. It doesn't know the word anxiety, depression, sleeplessness. It doesn't understand any of that because, as we get into with our introduction to the science of cannabis and the body, the endocannabinoid system is only concerned with one thing: maintaining homeostasis in the body. That's balance. Neurotransmitters send a signal to those clusters of endocannabinoids in the endocannabinoid system. That signal is, for example, rapid proliferation of cell growth in a cell or a tissue. The brain of the endocannabinoid system says, could be cancer. Sends out its little soldiers, which are chemical compounds, a combination of phyto, meaning plant, phytocannabinoids, what we get from cannabis and other herbs, with the endocannabinoids, endogenously produced cannabinoids in our body, in a dynamic interaction that goes out and directs itself to take care of that rapid proliferation of cell growth. Now, how does it know to do that? The same way lymph nodes know how to gather chemical compounds from the bloodstream to detoxify organs. That's what lymph nodes do. Lymph system detoxifies organs. The endocannabinoid system restores homeostasis through a series of cues from our genetic code, from RNA. That's how they read the signals and they know what to send out. Our body is brilliant that way, absolutely brilliant. So when you've got dementia, you've got a series of conditions that are presenting, and that's what we're treating, but with an herbal medicine, as opposed to a chemical synthetic medicine. We are treating it by getting at the root cause of the sleeplessness or the anxiety or the depression, redressing the root balance, restoring balance in the body's systems on a cellular level. Whereas using a synthetic chemical, we're overlaying on top of the symptoms and reducing symptoms. You can get rid of, by taking a pill, you can get rid of your runny nose easily, but does that get rid of the cause of the runny nose? No. So that's the big difference. That's the framework difference. We're working with the body's natural healing systems when we work with cannabis, and we're not when we're working with synthetic chemicals. So that's critical. So when we're talking about dementia, we know that on the spectrum, there's all different levels. And frankly, when I am interacting with people who are experiencing some of the indicators of dementia, as you will, and I've got a big long list here provided by our dear friend, Dr. Jeffrey Hergenrother, what are the indicators of dementia? And there's a lot of them, but I'm usually dealing with folks at an early stage, either with their family members coming in and they're concerned, not at a late stage. By the time they get to a late stage of dementia or Alzheimer's, they're usually with a practitioner in some sort of facility. So I'm in the really in the preventative front line of that. So we know that there are physiological conditions associated with dementia, a lessened blood flow to the brain. Inflammation is the number one big one. That's been there's a huge article about it in this month's February 2021 Sun magazine, and it's about, and there are many of these, there are many new articles about the relationship of inflammation to dementia and Alzheimer. So those are things we can do something about, and that's how the cannabis plant works. It's redressing imbalances. It's not recognizing the names of things that we give them. So now we've talked about seniors, we've talked about dementia. Let's talk about cannabis for a second, and then I'll go into how I approach patients with this. So why might cannabis be helpful in easing the symptoms and possibly slowing the progress of dementia? So it's basically because there's been some research done, animal studies and some clinical studies overseas, because we can't do them yet in this country. We know, although in a lab level, we've gotten some of it done this here, that the THC, the molecule in the plant that is supposedly the psychoactive molecule, actually the cannabis plant has no psychoactivity in it because within the plant, THC is THCA, THC acid, which is not psychoactive. You have to remove the chemical compounds, you have to decarboxylate it, and then create so this is a social construct like race and gender and all kinds of other goofy things. This is a social construct we've invented to create, to promote creativity, artists, musicians, this, Paris in the 20s, Harlem Renaissance, all of that, at the 60s and the hippies, great sex, great music, great, everything, and drugs, sex, rock and roll. That's all overlay. And that's one of the shackles around our ankle, not only the decades of bad messages and prohibition about marijuana. That's one shackle from the government and from mainstream media. The other shackle is all of the hippie romanticizing about cannabis. It's the best thing since sliced bread. It's going to create world peace. It's going to end global warming, everything. Like, okay. So sometimes when I'm doing my education within our own cannabis industry, I've got a whole series of myths to try to break down and say, okay, look, this is not the be all end all. It has to be part of an understanding, first of all, of how it works scientifically in the body. And it has to be part of a holistic system that includes nutrition, exercise, managing stress, a whole bunch of other things. So, it's an uphill battle being a medicinal cannabis educator these days. But so it's an herb. And that's the first thing that when we educate our patients on cannabis, it's not a drug. Everybody comes into it thinking it's a get high drug, and the only way to take it is smoke. So you have to start from scratch. It's an herb. It's been around. We've got written records for over 5,000 years of its efficacy with dealing with everything from childbirth to migraine, et cetera, et cetera. In the 1850s, Queen Victoria's personal physician wrote extensively in his journal about the use of Indian hemp to treat softening of the brain.
Wow.
Which was the Victorian language for dementia, right?
What was their delivery method of choice then? How is it?
He gave it to he says when he administered this hemp to his patients, invariably it gave them relief from symptoms and with no side effects. That in very flowery Victorian language, he wrote this. I don't know. Were they smoking?
But are they putting it in a pipe and smoking it? Or I mean, they're they're
question. Not. I don't know. That's a good question.
Or making.
So anyway, the point is that we have multiple written records of the usefulness of cannabis throughout the back in the 1850s, 60s. It was on the shelf in pharmacies. It was used for labor pains and all kinds of pain and issues. And it was just accepted. In fact, when the government has in 1939 and then again in 1970 attempted to and successfully prohibited marijuana, the AMA railed against that. They said, you can't do that. We use that in most of our medicines. What are you doing? So it's been a real mixed bag. But before we sit down and prescribe or recommend or identify a decent protocol to begin with our patients, we have to explain some basic things about the science of it. So we go through what is the endocannabinoid system? Why is it, what difference does it make that it's an herb and not a drug? How is it working with the body? Some of the things that we've already talked about together, and I go through with every person and get them to ask questions, get them to understand it, get them to be really clear about, okay, I have to be proactive about this. I have to understand my body. I have to keep a log. I have to keep a record of what I'm doing. I might have to change my ratio or change my dosing or change my delivery system. We go through the 5 rules of how to choose and use your cannabis medicines wisely. The first is it's got to be pure and potent. So we're talking about using a full spectrum, whole plant cannabis. So I say, look at the label when you go into a dispensary. Is it an isolate where they've taken one chemical out of the plant and they brag that, oh, it's pure CBD, there's no THC, there's no CBN, no CBG, nothing else in there. There's over 300 chemical compounds in this plant. And the way they work is something that called the entourage effect, the dynamic living interaction of these phytocannabinoids, these chemical compounds in the plant. And then when they get into your body, how they interact with the endogenously produced cannabinoids that the endocannabinoid system produces, they interact dynamically. Now, of that over 300 chemical compounds in the plant, they're divided into thirds. The first is cannabinoids, we know the most about, terpenes, which we're learning a lot about their healthy results in your body, and then flavonoids, which has so far gotten less attention, but it will. The cannabinoids work better together. So you get an isolate, like an isolated CBD without the THC, you're diminishing its strength. And this is one reason that hemp is another myth we need to throw out the window. Hemp is fantastic for rope, clothing, bioremediation of toxic dumps,
cleaning soil, right?
Yeah, all
exactly.
of that. It can save the earth from all these toxic spills, but it is not good as medicine. It's a bioremediator, so it sucks up the toxins in the soil. People are planting hemp all over the country because it's legal now. They're planting it in soil where there had previously been corn, soybean, whatever, lesser lucrative crops. What was in that soil? What was put on those plants?
And they're not regulated and tested like cannabis is.
And it's not, that's on the end. I'm at the beginning stage where you just plant it. You're going into soil where it's going to suck up those chemical compounds and chemical fertilizers. We don't want that in our medicine. Take a step further, that diminished chemical or diminished cannabinoid profile that you find in the hemp plant means it's not going to be as strong or as effective medicine. You can't achieve the ratios of particularly CBD and THC that you need to treat different conditions. So, and then beyond that, it doesn't get the lab tests that you're referring to check for mold and fungus and to check on its chemical ratios of the different cannabinoids. So there's a million problems with hemp. And it can destroy our whole plant cannabis crops through drift.
Right.
Drift.
Yeah. Then there's that. Yeah.
So, so these are steps, understanding the entourage effect, the necessity of these chemicals working together, and understanding to avoid hemp. Understanding that rule number 2, the first was pure and potent, right? Number 2 rule is what's the best delivery system? Everybody thinks the only way to take cannabis is by smoking. It's not true. That was the old hippie way and the beatnik way and the bohemian way, the artists and the musicians and Jackson Pollock and everybody else,
Right.
Yeah, that's what I did in college. We smoked it, I can't do that now. I just cough, But anyway.
Well, for chronic pain, there's I've seen a lot of studies recently that look around not chronic pain, but for acute pain or acute issues, that smoking really is a quick delivery system.
Well,
and that was one of the ways used for suggesting asthma. Inhaled.
But the problem is, it's even been shown good for asthma. But the problem is, it's excellent for symptom management, what you just talked about. For nausea, if you've got chemotherapy or something, nausea, sleep, and pain, it's excellent for symptom relief. But we're not talking about root healing.
Got it.
So symptom relief, it beats opiates hands down. It's not addictive. I was working the AIDS crisis in the 80s in San Francisco. And for the symptoms that those patients had, you couldn't find anything better. I had a bridge partner more recently, like about a year and a half ago, Mavis, 92 years old bridge partner, and she had a lung infection. And they gave her a bunch of pharmaceuticals and they said, take them on an empty stomach first thing in the morning, and it will get rid of that infection. We got to get rid of it or you're going to get pneumonia. It's very scary. You're 92. She would throw it up instantly. I said, Mavis, have you ever smoked pot? And she goes, oh, maybe back in the 60s. I said, okay, tomorrow morning I'm coming over. I don't smoke, but you and me, Mavis, we're going to smoke. We got rid of the nausea instantly. Took 30 seconds. She could keep the pills down. She could fight the infection. So you're absolutely right for a symptom manager, but we're talking about root level healing.
Right.
And for that, you need to get the whole spectrum of cannabinoids, whole plant, into your bloodstream so that the endocannabinoid system can use those chemical compounds to get to the site where there's imbalance and redress that imbalance. So So smoking is good for symptom management. Edibles, not good for either symptom management or root healing, mainly because when you put where in titration is one thing, where in that brownie is my medicine, where in that drink is my medicine. But more than that, when you swallow a drink or you eat a gummy or whatever, it goes into your stomach, and what does your stomach do? Your stomach does what it's supposed to do. It uses stomach acids to break the chemicals down, to extract nutrients from food. We don't want our whole plant, full spectrum cannabis medicine relying on the entourage effect, the dynamic interplay of those chemical compounds. We don't want that broken down. We don't want those separated from each other. It leaves the stomach, it moves into your digestive tract, your colon. What happens there? The same thing. Digestive enzymes are made to break things down. Well, that's all good for food, but that's not what we want to happen to our medicine. So what's the best way to take cannabis medicine? Through the oral mucosa. That's every part of your mouth, tongue, sides of the mouth, roof of the mouth. The whole inside of your mouth is the quickest way to get into the bloodstream and to the receptors in your brain. And you have receptor sites of the endocannabinoid system, the little clusters like lymph nodes, clusters of receptor sites throughout your body. And they're all in charge of different activities in your body and monitoring the balance of different activities. The best way to get that full spectrum into your bloodstream is through the membrane of the mouth. Now, if you have an infant or someone with cancer of the mouth or can't do that, the second best thing is brain blip. Suppositories. That was the word.
I just knew you were going there. I don't know why.
Yeah, didn't you? Yeah, right.
But I knew you were going there.
It's similar to oral mucosa, just on the other end.
Apparently it's the best way to find out if you have COVID
exactly.
too. But
so now there you're talking about when we get to rule number 2, best delivery system, we then have to talk about another myth and then about the basis for the medicine being carried into your system. And always herbalists and the AMA, and going way back, what was the medium they used to carry that into your system? Alcohol, because it sucks, it goes right into your system. Oil, which is what you'll see most of the tinctures are, because it's cheaper that way. It's cheaper to
and it's illegal in California to use alcohol with cannabis, isn't it?
Well, but no, that's not entirely true. It's legal to use biodynamic grape alcohol, but you just have to make sure the THC level is below 0.3%. That's because there's we sell alcohol-based tinctures at our dispensary. But here's the deal. I have personally, anything you will use to take the tincture into your body is a good thing. But I have 3 problems with oil-based tinctures. One is that oil is a food product. So you can have microbials growing, if you are not careful, keep it refrigerated, etc. You never have microbials with alcohol-based tinctures. Secondly, oil has a tendency to separate from the medicine it's carrying. So you'll find manufacturers, and you'll see it on the label, they'll use emulsifiers to get the molecules to adhere to each other. Emulsifiers. We don't want any extra stuff in our medicine. The number 1 rule was pure and potent. No additives, no cornstarches, read the label, nothing extra. Number 3 is the most important rule. Oil-based medicines have a harder time getting through the blood-brain barrier than alcohol-based ones. Again, alcohol is like sucks right through the membranes. It goes very easily. So those are the kinds of things, as we're going through the 5 rules on how to choose and use your cannabis medicine wisely, those are some of the myths and the fears and the concerns that people have. We're only through rule number 2. Rule number 3 and 4 is the real art of cannabis medicine, because it's in your hands as the patient. You have to be actively involved in how you feel. Number 3 is ratios, and your cannabis medicinal counselor, consultant, whatever, will advise you as to what ratios have been seen to work most frequently, anecdotally, for people with this particular condition that we're treating.
Like dementia.
What?
Like dementia.
Like dementia, exactly. And neurologically, we often work with a ratio of CBD to THC that is above 18:1. Very high CBD. And that's what they use, for instance, with the children with Dravet syndrome, the epilepsy with major epileptic. It's It's what they use with ALS, MS, Parkinson's, anything neurological, and inflammation-based things such as arthritis and diabetes. So anyway, that's all true. But then also, I don't want to go into something too detailed, but also when we're talking about ratios, we might have to change. And again, it has to do with your individual metabolism. So for instance, I was using a high CBD to treat children with autism, and it wasn't getting any great effect. I started working with a group of kids with autism in the Virgin Islands, and we went down to a 1-to-1 ratio. And it managed to calm them down. These were all infants and toddlers. Some of them got their first good night's sleep, which meant their parents got their first good night's sleep since they were born, and it was that 1-to-1 ratio because you up the analgesic effect of the THC. Now, again, remember there's 3 types of chemical compounds in the plant. The first is cannabinoids, the one that we study the most. If you had a pie chart of all the cannabinoids, which roughly, depending on who you read, range from 117 to 126 different cannabinoids, depends on your source.
More on the way.
Chart, most of those cannabinoids, CBN, CBG, would be little slices of pie. But a little over half of that pie chart is divided between 2 dominant cannabinoids, CBD and THC. So those are the ones that you'll see on the labels. Those are the ratios we're looking at. So the ratio of CBD to THC will, with dementia, we're talking about treating anxiety, stress, lack of focus. We may bring that ratio down to below 18-to-1, down into the 4-to-1 range. That's, again, that calming effect. The tincture that I recommend for sleep is a 1-to-1 ratio. It's called Focus. It's a wonderful biodynamic grape alcohol based tincture. And there's nothing in the tinctures that I recommend besides the plant and the carrier of alcohol. So there's no additives, no extra special stuff. So when we're looking at, so that's ratio, that's one factor. But then number 4 rule of the 5 rules is dosing. And dosing, God, it's critical that we understand. Most of the time when people have problems with the medicine, it's not working out exactly how they need it to, either too much, too little, they just can't quite get it right. 99% of the time, it's a dosing issue. So I've got 2 patients in particular who've come in, one with her husband, Mary and Paul, and she was having memory problems. She's having disorientation problems. She's confused and anxious, very anxious about that level of confusion. And Paul, kind of a taciturn fellow, not super active, not as active as I'd like him to be in terms of monitoring and helping her. But he did plug in some information as we talked. We spent an hour and a half talking, just your routine. What do you do? What's your diet like? We have to contextualize herbal medicine in the context of nutrition, exercise, stress, lifestyle, all of that stuff. So, and what we found that for her, it was really about an 8-to-1 ratio worked well. She didn't, if you went into a lower ratio, the effect of the THC was a bit too much for her metabolism, and it would increase her anxiety. So, the bad news about herbal medicine is you have to play around with it, dosing and ratios in particular. The good news is you can do no harm. Right. You can do no harm. Yeah. So, I one of the stories that my one of our neighbors of our first dispensary, also named Mary, she came in and she says, I can't sleep. My next door neighbor, Grace, got some THC suckers from you. I want some. I want those. I just can't sleep. I'm going crazy. They're both in their 70s, both of these women. She says, it's making me crazy. And I said, okay, just know that what works for Grace might not exactly work for you, but she says, well, I want those suckers. Just give me those suckers. And she goes tearing out and I go, well, let me know how it works, as you run out the door. And now she's a pretty smart woman. And that night she did what Grace did, which she had the suckers on her bedside table and she sucked on it for 30 seconds. And she slept like a baby till 3 a.m. and woke up higher than a kite.
Right.
But she remembered what I told her, which was, this is not the end of the world. Drink a lot of water, get yourself at a health food store everyday detox tea, keep it right next to your bedstand, put on an I Love Lucy and, relax for an hour, you'll be fine.
Yeah.
And she remembered that and she did it and she was okay. She got through it. The next night she sucked on it, not 30 seconds, but 10 seconds. She slept like a baby all night. Next morning at 10 o'clock when we opened up, she's at the door. I found my dose. So these are the stories. This is how it works,
It's crazy that we have to do it this way.
Well, it is.
Sucking on a sucker.
It's crazy, but it's always going to be this way. And this is why cannabis medicine, herbal medicine will never become the dominant paradigm that's one reason, because the capitalism in the marketplace can't handle patients, consumers being so individuated. They depend on us being cookie cutters.
Even though they profess that the new medicine is patient-centered care.
What does that mean? Yeah, exactly.
They claim that they're looking at us as individuals, except the structure is not supporting that.
The structure. I was giving a lecture there are a number of structures that aren't supporting it, and how our bodies, first of all, doesn't support that. I was giving my class to a group of doctors and nurses at St. Jude's Hospital in San Clemente. And I think I might have told you this story. I'm not sure, Chella, but anyway, let's do it again. So I was going through,
We haven't told our listeners, so.
Right. So I was going through my presentation about how I have to explain everything to the patients. I spend at least 45 minutes to an hour with every patient explaining how it works so they can take charge, keep a record, et cetera, et cetera. And a nurse raised her hand over here and said, this is really great. When do you think we'll be able to integrate this into our clinical practice? I took a very deep breath, trying to figure out how I was going to answer that. And over in the other corner, a doctor raised his hand. He says, we will never be able to integrate this into our clinical practice. And I said, she said, why? And he says, because the insurance industry won't let me spend more than 15 minutes with a patient. And I have a prescription pad in my hand. And that's what it's all about.
Yeah.
And, and that's it. I went to a wonderful conference of doctors who are interested in cannabis, doctors, nurses, other healthcare practitioners, and herbalists up in Arcata, sponsored by the Dandelion Herb Center. And it was the first time I'd ever had all these 100 people, both areas, both from herbal medicine and from allopathic Western medicine together. And on the presentations, on the panels, on the stage, talking about how are we going to ever bridge that huge gap between the approach of pharmaceutical synthetic symptom relievers and herbal root healing medicine. And there were no good answers. That was 4 years ago, but even just if you read Society of Cannabis Clinicians and some of their studies, and particularly the study Jeffrey and other Dr. Hergenrother and others have done about using this in hospice care, and smoking was still routinely considered, that was the way that you did it. And it's so we've got a lot of catching up to do, even within our own healthcare providers and our own. But old people I found for the most part don't want to smoke. It's really hard.
Yeah. Not only do they not want to smoke, but I know in Mendocino, people are more open-minded about cannabis because you're in the Emerald Triangle, I think. But I don't think most people are as open-minded about cannabis. There's still a real societal stigma that's very, very strong. And I would love to know some tips and tricks to break through that.
Yeah, there's a whole, well, as I was going through the rules, you try to address the fears. So one of the most common questions I get from, and again, most of my patients, so over 60% are over 65 years old. I'm on these medicines, and they'll list a bunch of different And how do I, how is it going to be if I'm taking cannabis? So I'm very glad to reassure them that they are parallel tracks. They're in terms of the overall treatment of the body, they are not contraindicative to each other. And I don't want to make that blanket general statement about every pharmaceutical and every form of cannabis, because obviously if you're going to be taking cannabis with especially Valium, OxyContin, alcohol. I mean, that's when you hear about all these Hollywood stars, people overdosing and they've got cannabis with them. It's because they're also mixing it with alcohol and cocaine and other recreational drugs. It's not the cannabis. You know why it's physiologically impossible to overdose on cannabis? Do you know why?
Tell us. I do, but tell us.
Do you? Okay. Because the receptors for the cannabinoids in the brain that are very close to the part of the brain that operates the cardiorespiratory system, the receptors for cannabis are nowhere near that area of the brain, whereas receptors for heroin, alcohol, opiates, all of those things right next to the place that rules your cardiorespiratory system. So you'll shut down your heart and your lungs with those things. But with cannabis, you can smoke, eat tinctures all day, all night. The worst thing that's going to happen is you'll fall asleep.
Yeah. I recently read in Dr. Bonnie Goldstein's book, Cannabis is Medicine, that the lethal dose is theorized at 70,000 milligrams for a 150-pound person.
Well, good luck trying to do that much.
That's a hell of a brownie right there.
No, that's a big brownie.
That's a big brownie. That's a wedding cake. It's a wedding cake.
That's a brownie made of like full extraction cannabis oil.
Yeah, exactly.
Now, what about that drug-drug interaction? Polypharmacy is a huge deal, and we're reading a lot more about how cannabis or even carrier oils could be affecting
how
other people's
CBD
medications.
is processed along the same liver pathways as a lot of other medications.
Being processed along the same pathways is not the same as contraindicating, causing a bad result of two chemicals meeting together. And there's very little evidence that I've seen so far. And if you have some, I'd love to see it. But I've seen very little evidence that herbal medicine in general has that kind of effect, working with pharmaceutical synthetic chemicals to create a whole third outcome, through their interaction.
Yeah, there was one study I read through Project CBD about a woman who died of sepsis. She had been on CBD medicine for 5 years, a tincture, I guess, and then she changed the brand. And shortly after changing the brand, she broke out in this terrible rash, but she was also on meloxicam. And the carrier oil for her new CBD was grapeseed oil. And apparently the grapeseed oil and the CBD are processed along the same pathways, and it may have changed how meloxicam and other drugs are processed in her body, and it may have caused polypharmacy, may have caused an intensification of drugs in her system, causing this.
That's absolutely possible. That makes sense to me too. And Project CBD, I trust a lot. The thing of it is, where I would start is I'd go back to the label on that CBD medicine. I'd look at what the heck with grapeseed oil. I mean, where are they raising the raw materials that go into these medicines? Like, remember the story about the toxins that are in the dirt? So one of the reasons, why the Emerald Triangle is the best place in the world for cannabis and pure and potent cannabis is because those hippies that went to India and Pakistan and everywhere, Afghanistan in the 60s, came back with seeds stuffed way down in their pockets and made it through customs. And they emigrated from New York and LA and San Francisco up to the Northern California, back to the land movement, right? They found when they got here that TPZ land. And what that means is that this was a part of the United States that was not polluted by extraction industries such as big agribusiness, minerals, other kinds of extraction industries. The extraction industry up here was timber. And timber extraction means you cut down trees and you haul them away. You don't do anything to the soil. So what they found here was rich, dark, pure virgin soil. Threw their seeds in the ground and boom, you've got cannabis that is so pure, so potent, and so much better than anything that you could find on the dusty hillsides of Afghanistan. This is that confluence, that magical confluence of sun, the right climate, sun, water, and that virgin soil. And there you've got it. So I go back to now with California is the biggest market in the world, as we know. And it's full of fly-by-night manufacturers who are rushing in. It's a green rush. And the way a green rush, like a gold rush, people make money is they rush in, do high volume sales of mediocre, cheaply produced products and get out. That's the whole goal is to make money. And when they get their grapeseed oil, where'd they get it from? What was it grown in? Is it pure? I mean, there's a million questions. And that's the number one rule of the 5 rules is make sure it's pure and potent. And that's very hard to do in this rapidly growing cannabis marketplace nationally and internationally, which is why we work very hard with Origins Council, and I'm on the board of the Mendocino Cannabis Alliance on policy to control and regulate things like hemp production and whether it's used for medicine that shouldn't be used for medicine, in our opinion, how we control that. And all of these fly-by-nights coming in, these medicine makers coming in and making cheap products that are not, they're not in line with the principles and values of herbal medicine, to put it simply. So this is a real, so yeah, that story that in Project CBD, that's highly likely, but there's a million reasons that could happen.
There are a million reasons that could happen. And I did a little more digging and I followed their sources and stuff. And I saw that there was a study that showed that at 25 milligrams, that pathway is impacted and it increases the amount of other medicines in the system. But then another study showed that at 45 milligrams CBD, it didn't. So there needs to be more studies, especially with as many medicines that can be impacted by that same pathway.
Well,
we need more studies, but at low doses, at micro doses, like you're talking about, like we're talking about for people living with dementia,
right.
It's not, it doesn't seem to be associated at all.
Right. Well,
so
that's the key thing. We just tripped over into rule number 3 was ratio. Rule number 4 was dosing. We tripped into rule number 5, which is the individuation. Now, who did they give the 45 milligram one to? Who did they give the 25 milligram to? What was their metabolisms different? You can't do this uniform, extrapolate big consequences from a medicine, an herbal medicine that is principally dependent on the individuated metabolism. How are you going to measure that? It's a new challenge for the scientific method, basically. You know,
How do you do a trial of that with that model? You need such a large sample to get any type of real effective
range
numbers.
To get a range, right?
Exactly. It's a big trick. So let me introduce another one of my early stage. I got another fellow. And he's Fred. He's a man in his early 70s. He's semi-retired. He's forgetting things. He's starting to have, and what's happening is that you have first presentations of I'm a little not quite myself. I'm not on top of things as much. I'm forgetting things, and then it drifts into anxiety, fear, sense of powerlessness. Those kinds of things keep you awake at night. You lose sleep. Tiredness exacerbates, stress levels go up, adrenal levels go up. You've got a whole chain of things that start happening. So you're getting into a pre-dementia, if not outright dementia state right then and there. So Paul has a long history. I'm making up names because I don't want to use real names. Anyway, he has a long history with THC. So the 1-to-1 ratio of CBD to THC tincture for him wasn't working. And we decided to go to something stronger. And what I recommended for him, and does work really well, is a small 1 gram plastic syringe of golden, cleaned, purged 4 times THC oil, pure. I've got Delta 9 and Delta 8 THC oil. The Delta 8 is, you know what a molecule looks like, a chemical molecule, a diagram of a THC. If you take one leg out of it, it's Delta 8. Delta 9 is what most medicines have in them. Most of the get high things that you find in a dispensary are Delta 9 THC. Delta 8 is one leg is out, means it's slightly less psychoactive for most people. Now, for someone like me, I've got no resistance whatsoever to THC. That doesn't make any difference. But for him, we had to even go to the Delta 9 for him, and using microdoses of THC, he didn't have to get high, he could still function. And I'm talking microdoses of THC that I recommend for my patients, especially my seniors, is the size of the head of a straight pin. That's how tiny we're talking. So you squeeze out of that syringe a size of the head of a straight pin, put it on the tongue and let it melt through the oral mucosa into the brain. And he does that every day, and he is focused. He can get his work done. His anxiety's gone. He's just really, he forgets to take it. He starts to get anxious again.
Yeah.
But I'm just saying that for seniors who don't want to get high and they're experiencing some of what Jeffrey Hergenrother calls the indicators of dementia, we can go with a microdose of THC, and they don't have to worry about getting high. And then it's very effective at reducing those indicators. So
Right.
that's what
Probably because it's addressing the root cause, right?
well, exactly that imbalance in the brain. I have another patient who's she really couldn't present to herself for herself. Her daughter and her family live here on the coast. She is retired in New Mexico. She was getting to display pretty dangerous behaviors, leaving home and getting lost and things like. So anyway, they went down to pick up mom. Her name is Alice, and they bring her back up to the coast to stay with them for a while, to just get a beat on, just how bad is this? What stage is it at? And they came to see me, and she has a really hard time taking anything. She doesn't even take pharmaceuticals. She just doesn't want to take anything. She's scared to death to take anything. So they actually gave her drinks with the tincture in it.
Yep.
And her hardest thing was riding in the car, and the trip up from New Mexico to the Mendocino coast was hell.
Oh, yeah.
Because she was so anxious. She was crying. She was in distress. It was a horrible, horrible experience. And her daughter said to me, we cannot do that ever again. We've got to reduce her anxiety, and her anxiety, and it's just this fear, this loss of control. When you're getting into that, my mother was like that she got angry and frustrated, and it's very hard.
Yeah.
So anyway, they put a very high CBD, like it was over 18-1, CBD tincture in her drink. And it actually had the effect of calming her down so that she could ride in the car. Now, usually I would go with a much lower ratio so that we potentiate the analgesic effect of the THC, but that wasn't necessary with her. And I've had other patients say, CBD really calms me down. I've never had that I take CBD every day for inflammation, because we're all walking around with inflammation, and inflammation is the root of dementia and lots of other things too, Alzheimer's. So I take 3-4 times a day. I take half of a dropper of from a 1 ounce bottle of 25-1 CBD. Never has it had a calming analgesic effect, but for her, it was. So you see what I mean? It's people want formulas.
Yeah.
They want me to say exactly what to take to get this result.
Yeah.
And that's why the class is so important, and explaining how it works in the body is so important. I mean, that's the bad news about herbal medicine. It's not formulaic, but it's good news too, because what we're dealing with is what's really going on for you, and not what some chart says you should be going on for you,
Absolutely.
Some of the future things that are going on with possible treatments. And there's a lot of, you referred to this earlier, there's a lot of research going into psilocybin. I mean, I think the first order of business is to see cannabis medicine in the context of holistic medicine. So nutrition is critical. Since in the 20th century, since our diets have changed, if we think about our ancestors, if they had meat on the table, it was like one Sunday a month. If they had wine, it was Christmas. So we've graduated to a part where we're eating meat every day, white sugar, processed flours. We're drinking alcohol and coffee and tea, all these acid foods and drinks that increase inflammation in our bodies. So as they're saying, Dr. Rayson was saying, the psychiatrist in this month's issue of
Sun magazine, yeah.
Sun, thank you, was he's saying everybody in modern Western society is walking around with a certain amount of inflammation.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a basis for heart disease, diabetes, dementia, Alzheimer's, a whole range of things. Mm-hmm. So everybody should be taking CBDs routinely. Mm-hmm. But so that's one thing my favorite story about contextualizing cannabis was the summer of 2012. We were just going for a little while, and a young man, well, he's 42 years old, he was young to me, walks in and says, I'm cleaning up my act. He says, I'm going to see a nutritionist, I'm doing yoga, I'm starting to meditate, I'm going to really clean up my act, I've got a serious condition, I've come in to get some cannabis medicine for it. I said, okay, well, what's your serious condition? And he says, well, I've got 4th stage stomach cancer. I go, whoa, that's pretty serious. And cannabis works well on some cancers. Stomach cancer is a tough one. And he says, there's just one thing I won't give up. And I'm completely empathetic to this because I like my dark chocolate. I like to have, a glass of wine or brandy or something once in a while. Everybody has, that's quality of life issues. Everybody has something that they cheat with,
Right.
So I was sympathetic, and I said, okay, well, what's the one thing you won't give up? And he said, red wine with dinner. I drink wine with dinner. I go, is that every night? And he goes, yeah. And I said, well, how much do you drink? And he says, a bottle a night by myself. And I'm thinking to myself, stomach cancer, acid, sugar, all the things that help cancer cells metastasize and grow and blow up. I said to him, look, cannabis is not a magic pill. There are no magic pills in natural healing. If you're not addressing the stress in your life, and which increases anxiety, which increases sleeplessness and fatigue. I mean, we're leading ourselves with our lifestyles and our bad nutrition into states of dementia and Alzheimer's. It's just, it's a growing phenomenon. The statistics are there. You quote them on your website. How many people are experiencing this? So this is the contextualizing. Other things that are coming down the line besides the first line of defense is reduce your inflammation. Get exercise. You want to increase bloodstream to your brain. Clean up your nutrition. Go online and find a simple chart that shows alkaline to acid spectrum foods and drinks. Stay in the alkaline area. Stay away from the acids. Get exercise. Clean up your nutrition. Do anything you can do to reduce inflammation in your body, and that includes taking CBD every day. So that's your front line, most immediate, easy things to do. In the future, they're looking at psilocybin. And for some people, like with bipolar and extreme mood disorders, the psilocybin paste is good. Wow. Some people, it doesn't work. But this is a frontier that they're doing a lot of work on right now. MDMA, along with psychotherapy. Dr. Rayson, as a psychiatrist, he thinks that's the next up and coming thing.
It's huge. That's they've been making it's especially with PTSD.
Yeah, exactly. You got it.
Yeah.
That's
we need to change the drug scheduling because it seems like a lot of the things on the Schedule 1 might actually be helpful.
Oh, absolutely. I think we're in a new era now where we've gotten rid of the last 4 years of craziness.
But it needs to be descheduled. We don't want Biden rescheduling into 2, and that's going to screw everything up.
That's right. It's got to be descheduled. And there's a lot of people pushing that. And his commission is actually full of some pretty good people. Biden's seems to be on the right track. We're holding our breath and we're doing a lot of lobbying.
Yeah.
And then ketamine. Is another thing that I don't know very much about, but it's starting to come on the horizon as something that people are looking at. And the other one is L-serine. It's an amino acid that serves critical brain function, stimulates critical brain function. Another thing I don't know very much about. So these are new things that are down the road and worth keeping an eye out. So there's a lot of stuff on the horizon, a lot of stuff going on. There was a huge study from Israel. Israel's been in the vanguard, as you know, about palliative care. Cannabis and palliative care has been great. They did a huge study of 2,970 patients measuring safety and effectiveness. And there was like 96% reported an improvement in their condition. 3.7% reported no change whatsoever. 0.3% reported a deterioration in their medical condition. But after 6 months, 69.5% of the patients they worked with, 2,970 patients, had gotten off all their opioid medications. So I just wanted to throw that in there just to give another you were wondering about other uses besides direct treatment of dementia and Alzheimer's, but the treatment of people in palliative care is real. That's another frontier.
Where do you think that there's any progress to be made in legislatively, like requiring doctors to take this education?
Well, it was a miracle. In summer of 2017, I was invited to be at a week-long Ohio state of, this is amazing. The state of Ohio granted continuing medical education credits, CMEs, to doctors and nurses who wanted to learn about cannabis as medicine.
Wow.
They also did this at Dominican University in San Rafael here, and I was at that one too. But this one was interesting because Ohio, fairly conservative state, and we had 150 doctors and nurses, and we were sitting in around big tables, 15 at each table. And during the course of the week, we're there every day from 8 to 5, Monday through Friday, learning from all of the geeky, the Hergenrothers and everybody from the Society of Medical Physicians. Yeah, all those folks were up there talking in big 6-syllable words about the biochemistry of cannabis science, et cetera, et cetera. And my job was to help doctors and nurses figure out how to translate all of that into clinical language for their patients, because they understood what they were saying, but still, how do you explain that to a patient? Yeah. Anyway, the body language around the table started changing over the course of the week. And by Thursday, people were like rolling their eyes and whispering to each other. And there was a lot of discomfort. And I was getting, oh my God, we're losing them. What's going on, And finally, at the end of the day, Thursday, one of them a nurse slammed her hand down on the table and said, I am so angry. Why were we never taught in nursing school or medical school that the body has an endocannabinoid system? All mammals with a spine have an endocannabinoid system. Why didn't they tell us that? And I didn't say anything because my job was to be quiet and just kind of, I wasn't supposed to ruffle any feathers. But by Friday morning, they were still really complaining about this. How can we even begin to do this? How can we take this into our practice? Yeah. And I said, okay, let's stop and go around the table and tell me who the principal funder is of your medical school or your nursing school. And it was Johnson & Johnson, Pfizer, Merck. So there's a certain obstacle. Now, that's one part of the answer to your question. But the other part about legislation is that when the states start to legalize either what they call recreational cannabis, I don't think there is such a thing. I think it's all medical, and medical cannabis, when they start to do that, they don't know what they're doing. They're filled with all the same myths in their head and misconceptions about cannabis as everybody else is. The pharmaceutical industry jumps in and comes up to them and says, hey, we'll help you. We see this as a very important thing to be doing. We've got the scientists, we've got the labs, we've got the infrastructure all set up. We're here to serve you. And so they think, well, God, that's going to save us millions and millions of dollars to just hand it over to the pharmaceutical companies, because we don't have the setup to do this. And we certainly can't trust those dirty hippies that grow it, right? So you end up with the pharmaceutical industry taking it over and turning it into what they need it to be to make money.
Molecules.
This is not just my paranoia. This is absolutely, the writing is on the wall.
No, it's more than on the wall. It's in the lab. It's happening. And the father of all things.
Yes.
On it. Oh my God.
It's awful.
I feel like there's room for all of it.
Yeah.
As long as they don't outlaw our way, I think that they can find their way also.
Yeah.
But there should be room for the entire spectrum of everything, from all plant medicine, healing, to the molecules, for people who are not going to ever do the research and keep the notebook and do the things. There's some people who just aren't going to do it.
Well, no, I absolutely agree with you. But I think as education continues, it'll become more and more welcome, because people are tired of the side effects of pharmaceutical drugs. But you know what you said about as long as they don't outlaw, I think that train has left the station. I don't think it's going to be outlawed. The trend is for more and more states to legalize. The devil will be in the details. Who's going to be in control? What will be the regulations? What will be the standards for medicine that's produced? All of that. That's where we have to be vigilant.
Well, I think they want to take the dirty hippies out of the picture. Corporate cannabis, and the same way with psilocybin is going to go the same way. I mean, most of the research has been with the molecule. It's been isolated, and all that research has been done traditionally. And part of the reason why it's gone so quickly, and they were able to do that. They were able to isolate it, do the studies with it. And that's the way psilocybin is going to go. You're going to get a prescription from your psychiatrist for a microdose of psilocybin that you're going to get at the pharmacy. You're not going to be growing mushrooms in your closet.
But you should be allowed to grow mushrooms.
You should be allowed to, absolutely.
If you want to.
That form.
And that's the way with cannabis. I mean, in California, you get to grow 6 plants, which actually.
If your landlord lets you.
What?
If your landlord allows it.
Oh, right.
And your neighbors don't see it,
that's where the
smell
devil
it, or hear it.
Details. We need to expand the number. We need to expand the allowances where it can be grown. There's a whole lot of, that's the details that we work on a policy level every day. It's tricky. It's a long haul.
Dude,
it's been a real pleasure chatting with you. And I know we could talk forever.
Yeah, we could go on. There's so much yet to say, but we could go on. But let's keep in touch. And thank you so much. Where people find me, and I do consultations for folks by telephone from Australia to the Virgin Islands. So you could go to the website dragonflywellness.org and contact us. Is at the top right corner. You just put in your information and we will get a hold of you. But I will give my email address out. Why not? Right now, which is Jude, Jude, at the letter C, change. So CCHANGE.org. My education nonprofit is Creative Change Productions, and that's the education arm of our dispensary, Dragonfly.
Perfect.
Wow, you're doing all the things, Jude. You're doing all the things. This is talk about being a vanguard.
Yeah, this is great. We have such a mountain to climb in terms of public education and industry education and healthcare provider education. Those 3 parts of the triangle, all 3. We've got a huge mountain and we need to help each other. Right. All right. Take care.
Well, thank you. Take care.
All right. Thank you.
Thanks, Jude.
Bye-bye.
Thanks for joining us for Cannabis Helps Dementia. Be sure to download, rate, and review us on iTunes or your favorite podcasting network.
And please share this podcast with anyone you know in relationship with dementia.
Do you want to tell your story of how cannabis helps dementia? Leave us a voice message at anchor.fm/cannabishelpsdementia. Or you can drop us a note or connect with us on the socials.
Check out the Society of Cannabis Clinicians website to find real medical professionals familiar with cannabis medicine in your area or online.
Because you remember, we're not doctors, just family caregivers turned advocates.
And don't forget, download, like, and share what you learned. Cannabis helps dementia.
Why don't you get wise? Get up and get out. Get rid of that frown that's been dragging you down and get up in the air. Just pretend that you can fly. You'll never know if you